I hear it now. Welcome, welcome. That was beautiful, wasn't it? I really enjoy that. Sometimes I listen to that music when I am relaxing. I am going to take this gum out of my mouth. It's not polite to chew gum while you are talking to people. I love gum. So, welcome to Elephant in the Room, Etta B. We are at episode 5. I'm so proud and thankful. Got a little glow back here behind me. It's not natural. It is the light behind me, but that's okay. Let's see if we can adjust that some. It's just going to get brighter. That's okay. Let's see if I can adjust my screen so we don't get such a glare. It's just really sunshiny out today. So we're just going to have to deal with our glare. So we're at episode 5, still up and going. Happy to be here. So now every fifth episode is going to be uh, about spirituality. I'm a person that challenges spiritual dogma. I've challenged my own understanding of spiritual dogma, and I encourage other people to challenge themselves of spiritual dogma. Okay? Because the things that we believe are so important to culture. Okay? I honestly, for this show, did not write down a whole lot of information because it's all up here. I know what direction I want to go in as far as things I want to explore together, family, with the community on our beliefs system. Okay. Hear the audio to make sure that is coming through, and I was able to confirm that. So, yesterday, my wonderful, wonderful artist who does my locks retwisted. As you can see, I've got some retwisting here. I've got some more hang time here. My locks have really grown from when I first got them done. And why are my locks important to me? There's a spiritual significance to your hair in our ancient history that some of you may or may not know about. But your hair has a spiritual connection. What we do to our hair, what chemicals we allow to go into it, all those sorts of things play a contributing factor to our spiritual well being, I believe. These are my personal beliefs. So if you go out and research it and decide that that is or is not for you, these are personal beliefs that I'm stating to you. And I'm challenging people to be willing to look into some of these things and ask some questions about their personal beliefs. I believe that our spiritual self contributes to the healthiness of our nails, our hair, our skin, and even deeper than that, our spiritual self and well being. Okay, these are all contributing factors. So, what I wanted to start off with was walking down memory lane for me and my history and how I've arrived at some of the belief systems that I currently am in. Uh, I think this all started back when I was in Sunday school. I was raised Christian Baptist. And in Sunday school, I learned about the story of Jesus the Christ. I learned about the Trinity, the divinity of the Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I've noticed over time that uh, that message has changed slightly a bit to Mother, Son, and Holy Spirit, depending upon what church you go to. But I learned it as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We believed in reading the King James Bible. Um, that was one of the more significant doctrines. And also, if you all remember, the Gideon's Bible was very popular. I would say we started off with the Gideon's Bible before the King James Bible became the most prominent and important. Okay. And in Sunday school, learning the many stories in the children's books, I remember having a sense of, if I really want to think back to those times, I remember being afraid, that everything I did, that I was going to hell and I just wasn't good enough. I remember feeling that this story could not necessarily be for me because it didn't have characters that really identify with me. At that time, all the characters were white. Um, and interestingly enough, if I look at some of the older stories, some of the stories were um, the bad guys would tend to be drawn darker or darker complected, and the heroes of the story tend to be drawn lighter complected. Now, does that mean that a particular spiritual um, story is incorrect? I would say not necessarily. And I'll talk about that as I move along. But um, as far as me being a young girl and a little girl and being a churchgoer, because we were almost expected to be in church almost every Sunday, especially from a young girl. And as time went by, as my grandmother became older, that um, practice of visiting the church um, changed over time. It wasn't as often. But I just remember these feelings as a little girl, okay? Being very afraid. I was taken between two churches. My grandmother's church, Unity Baptist Church, which is still here, Pastor Reverend D. Stotts, um, Valdemir, I believe is his first name, D. Stotts. He recently passed away within the last couple of years. I can't remember the exact day, but I remember a coworker who happened to go to the same church made that announcement. And basically, he was the founder and pastor of that church for many, many years. Good spirited man. He had a vision. He worked on a lot of different things in the community at that time. So, again, when I'm talking about my spiritual walk, I'm not talking about demonizing or making liars out of anyone who were teaching the essential dogma that they knew to be true at that time, which was Christianity and which was a division of Christianity called Baptists. If anyone's listening to the show and don't understand the breakdown of that, within the umbrella of Christianity, there are different groups that sprung out from that. One of the oldest groups being the Catholics, which people sometimes don't understand that Catholics are Christian, and moving right along to a lot of different sects from the Methodist, Presbyterian, Seventh Day Adventists, Jehovah Witnesses, Protestants. So there's a lot of history that goes into the different sects of the church. And if you sects, SECTS for people who think I'm saying sex, the different sects of the church. And so, if you go along this history, you'll realize that a lot of the separation of the churches was based upon belief systems changing, um, cultural changes affecting belief systems. Okay. So, learning the Bible story as a little girl, learning the different key stories, the story of Easter, Passover, the story of Christmas, um, the story of what's another major theme throughout the year? I know Easter's a big one, and then Christ's birth, which was celebrated as Christmas. Um, the story of Job, um, the story of the 12 disciples, uh, the story of, oh gosh, I'm forgetting, not forgetting, but just not placing some of the stories. that I learned over time. Essential themes, and these were some of the stories that you learned over time, continuously. Okay, so a lot of times throughout the year, as those seasons came about, those stories were revisited, they were celebrated, and became a central theme of the Baptist church that I belonged to. So the other church I was talking about earlier, that was my grandmother's church. My grandfather's church was the Methodists. Okay, and being a young girl coming into teenager years, I remember going to that church, making friends at that church. And that church, unlike the Baptist church, had a very older group of people, to the point where that church was beginning to struggle. And eventually, I believe, is no longer there unless they've revamped it since I've been back home. But before I left home, unfortunately, that church burned down. And that was after my grandfather's death. And some of the principles I learned there. That church was a little bit more reserved and conservative. They were into hymnal type of worship as Methodists, whereas Baptist, it was more of uplifting, singing, gospel type of worship. Okay, in my grandmother's church, you were up and down on your feet, praising the Lord. The Holy Ghost was a central theme. Whereas in my grandfather's church, it was more reserved, conservative. Hymns were sung, but they were sung more like maybe reminiscent of how Catholics uh, celebrate, just more structured, more hymns. At this time, we're going to sing this hymn, we're going to do the recitations and things like that. And some of those themes carried over to the Baptist church. We did recitations, reading of the passage, and the pastor would read his verse, and then the congregation would read a verse to witness to what the pastor was saying. So I learned a lot in those churches. On worship. It never really dawned on me necessarily that grandmother church and grandfather church were different necessarily, but just that worshiping God was the central theme. As I began to get older and come into my own, my teenage years between the ages of 13 and 18, I began to question some of those belief systems based upon familial conflicts that have happened, based upon uh, just my own coming into being as an individual, because that will happen if any of you have children who are growing um, and coming into their own. You'll notice that sometimes there's a sort of not rebellion but challenge of your belief systems based upon peer groups, different things they might hear out on the internet. Now the internet is wide open, and so children can begin to learn information from the internet. And so the challenge to adults now raising children is that they have more resources for information, whereas when I was younger, you literally had to go to the library if you wanted to know anything. Everything was at the library in the building, and your library information was restricted to whatever that library was able to get its hands on, based upon who requested information to that library from the librarian. And it just could vary. And you had, I think at that time, microfiche was popular, so you did have microfiche copy of information where you can kind of request old newspaper clippings. Encyclopedias were very prominent. Whereas now, in comparison, our children basically have a wealth of knowledge at the palm of their hands. So technology has allowed us to get our hands on a lot more information, which brings me to where I am now today in my spiritual self. So before I get into now, though, I do need to talk about a point in time in which I joined the Mormon church. Okay, so coming away from Methodist teachings, coming away from Baptist teachings, due to my own search for knowledge, and running into some missionaries over at my girlfriend's house. And we were 17, 18, senior year in high school, and the missionaries happened to stop by our home, and they began to talk about Jesus Christ in a way I had never personally heard white people talk about Jesus Christ, because the Church of Latter-day Saints, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is overwhelmingly a white church. Okay, unbeknownst to me at the time, their teachings were of Jesus Christ, but they had a figure named Joseph Smith. So that was a little bit different than the story I had learned about Moses and Jacob and Isaac um, and Abraham being the patriarchs of the church and bringing the gospel. This version of Christianity in the Mormon church brought on a character, Joseph Smith, who, upon coming to the Americas, claim is that he was visited by the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And in this visitation, he was instructed to bring the word of God per Christianity teachings to the Americas. And that teaching was slightly modified in a book called the Book of Mormon, okay, which is an extension of writings that encase the mostly New Testament, focuses on the New Testament, and focuses on the atonement of Christ. And from that, they created kingdoms that you can arrive at, which, if I remember correctly, celestial, terrestrial, and celestial kingdoms that those who are Christians who wish to do well in their faith and hold the commandments that would have been of the Old Testament, but again, they focused on the New Testament and added some other books that were um, lost to the original doctrine of the Bible, because the Bible has been rewritten over a lot of years and based upon different sects of the Christianity model. Okay, and so in this modification of the Christian faith, um, these believers of Christianity had another twist on it. They decided to reinstate the prophet. The priesthood of the prophecy. So they have a prophet in their church. They have a process similar to the Vatican in which they come about the new prophet when one prophet is supposed to progress along and a new prophet is supposed to come. I can't remember how many years or what the rationale for when a new prophet comes in. I mean, I would assume that it's more so based upon, either a prophet aging or, maybe someone or that prophet receiving word that it's time for them to step down and now it's time to choose a new prophet. And so, hindsight being 2020, joining that church, one of the problems I personally had with being in that church, so the Baptist church, I just felt like um, I had grown from that, and some of the teachings didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Just keep circling around these concepts, and it's a whole Bible to study. So to me, we weren't really learning the Bible and breaking it down. Sometimes you ask questions, the elders just say, "Trust in God, and God will lead the way," but they didn't really have a lot of answers to some of the questions I had formulated in my mind as a teenager. And just moving from the areas, not being as convenient as a young adult, going into college, trying to still participate. So there's lots of reasons why I didn't attend my old church anymore. And just coming away from the practice of going to church, it just became a thing like, oh, it's laborious. I don't want to go. I don't want to be committed to going to church every Sunday. The Methodist church, I witnessed those folks actually fighting with their pastor because there was a time in that church history for United Methodist Church that was on, gosh, what road was that? Was that Chicago? Chicago near Wyoming, I believe that is, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, they inherited a new pastor. He was an African man, and he began to bring the principles of African teaching to the Methodists. So you had African Methodist Episcopal churches, and so he changed them from being a Methodist church to an AME church, which I believe stands for African Methodist Episcopal. Okay, and so he tried to change the congregation into that, and there was a lot of friction there. I actually witnessed some of that, literally those in the congregation while the pastor is preaching, like really being adamant about some of the teachings. And so, I saw that division firsthand. Moving on to the Mormon discipline, as I tried to become a part of that in my search for God, and learning that I couldn't be a part of that church any longer because when I began to look at the procession of prophets throughout the church, starting from Joseph Smith, going down to the most current prophet at the time, which, oh gosh, I don't remember the gentleman's name now, but that was maybe back in 1996 time. Um, I learned that what I was against, or what felt in my being to not be a part of that church anymore, which I was baptized in that church, baptized as a Baptist originally. When I was rebaptized in that church and rededicating myself to, the teachings of Christ and the laws of Christ, what I learned was that they never had a prophet that happened to be non-white, non-European, and I just had a problem with that. I said to myself, how could God appoint people knowing that there were all sorts of people belonging to this particular congregation, even though it was predominantly right? But how can it so happen that if these things are sanctioned by the Creator, that they all happen to be white? I had a problem with that, a serious problem with that. Me being the Afrocentric person I've always been, that's something that's always been instilled in me, to be about my people, to really identify with the Black experience, being an African American, colored, whatever you want to call it. I've always identified with that. I've never stepped too far away from that. Even if I have been willing to learn the teaching of others, there's always been something centralized in me to still come back to the African experience. And so um, I went to one of the presidents of the church at that time, because their structure was they had presidents that oversaw a particular district. And so I went to the president of the church at that time, and I asked them about that fact. Why is it that all of your prophets happen to be European? And one of the answers was, well, we recently had someone who was of Native American descent, recent. They were, I think, I'm not sure if they held. I would have to pull up online uh, the procession of their prophets, and see if it was a president that was of Native American descent, or if it was of a hierarchy like a bishop or something like that. But I had to look at that again. But you know, I looked at that, and I looked at the president, and I said, that's impossible. How on earth could God appoint all Anglo-Saxon, European, white people to be the prophets of the church? That doesn't make any kind of common sense. If this is a random thing and this is people who are involved in the church, how is it that they're all white? When you know that you have other people who have been dedicated, who, have adhered to the teachings. And so, long story short, I got away from that. I said, okay, this is something weird about this. I can't really jive with this. I think it's, a good church. The Latter day Saints do a lot in the community. They do missions around the world. But unfortunately, now that I've received more historical training um, within the last 5 to 7 years, I now understand what missionary work was all about. It's a dogmas and indoctrination, and the history behind the indoctrination of the colonizers, primarily Europeans, is that they removed the cultural sense of the people and their belief systems, and they pretty much replaced it either forcefully or cunningly with their doctrine and their belief system for the premise of world domination. Now, is that the plight of the Latter day Saints? Can't say for sure because I don't practice their dogma anymore. But what I do know about the history of the Latter day Saints is, and I later found out in um, my better researching tools moving forward as a more mature person in my faith, I found out that originally some of their teachings that have changed over time, but when they were first introducing teachings to the African American community, they were teaching that we were of the tribe of Canaan, which, if you know the history of Canaan, they were supposed to be the cursed family of the 12 tribes of Judah. And the reason why they were the cursed family is because they received that mark, the so called mark, okay, that God bestowed upon Cain because Cain had been disobedient. But their interpretation of that is that that mark would mean black people, okay? You can research it, look it up for yourself. I've already done the research. You all know when I get done with my videos, I put information in the commentary so you'll be able to look at some of that information. But I've learned that their original teachings was basically that Black people were heathens and they needed to be corrected out of it, which kind of dates back to slavery, right? In slavery, we were taught that our gods that we practiced in and believed in, which would have been under the umbrella of what people are calling polytheism now, needed to be moved from that dogma to monotheism. Okay, and monotheism was the way to go. In monotheism theory, even though people have challenged Christianity and saying, hey, you don't believe in monotheism because you believe in a Father, Son, and a Holy Ghost, you're saying that they act under one spiritual guidance, but these are three beings, distinct beings with different personalities. So, how can you call your dogma monotheism? These are some of the challenges that have happened over time. But Christianity, even still, even though that is the thing, still gets to be called monotheism. Okay, and so from there, I realized that, wow, unless you study the history of some of these belief systems, you can get caught up in a belief system that you don't know where it came from. You don't understand the genesis story of these particular dogmas. Even though they're under the umbrella of Christianity, one may assume, oh, well, what difference does it make? We all, I don't care if God is purple, blue, polka dot, blue, green. Well, let's be honest. Are there blue people? Are there green people? Are there polka dot people? Those are fictitious types of people. Okay. So if you don't care about what color people are, you don't have to create fictitious people to go under the umbrella of not caring. You just deal with what is already here. Which people are not a color. I'm not black, right? I use black as a tool because I understand that it has a political connotation to it. But I'm not black, you're not white, you're not yellow, you're not red. There's no such thing as those people. So we know that some of these things that have been created for other reasons, right? But sticking to the spiritual side of it, I came away from the Mormon church, which I still have all my books on that. A lot of these I've read through. A lot of the themes are repetitive. And another thing I want to mention here in my research that I learned over time is that if you're going to study one of the three major religions, which would be Islam, which would be Christianity, and which would be Judaism, all of those three religions, when I decided to take a comparative religion course, I learned that those three religions come out of what is called Abrahamic religions. What does that mean? What is Abrahamic religions? Well, a lot of people don't know that first came Judaism, then came Christianity, then came Islam in that order. A lot of people don't know that. Okay. And again, how do we get all of these different sects of the same dogma and doctrine? So the book that was first studied as far as spiritual dogma of recent, I want to make sure I emphasize of recent, was the Torah. Okay, the Torah is what Jesus the Christ studied. People gonna fall all apart once they hear me saying this. What are you talking about? He studied the Bible. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to do some more research. You're going to have to do a timeline. So on a sheet of paper, you're going to probably need 3 or 4 sheets of paper as you do your timelines, or you can do multiple lines down, but you're going to have to do timelines. When you begin to do timelines, then you're going to be able to understand the historical significance of the different dogmas that have come out. Okay. So the historical timeline would be initially the Torah. Now, we're going to get into where the Torah came from, which is going to be controversial for a lot of you because this is not something that your pastors are teaching. And it's not because when they go to theology school they don't know this. It's because that it is not very attractive to talk about these historical contexts because then it's going to bring about more uncomfortable questions that require the congregation that you're teaching to say, hold on, wait a minute. I thought you said the book of God, a Bible, was the all knowing. I thought you said the book of Islam was all knowing. I thought you said the book of Mormon was all knowing. I thought you said the Torah was all knowing, okay, and the Talmud. So all of these books that have been created by man, hear what I'm saying. All of these books that were created by man which that's another point of discussion and debate. No, they weren't created by man. They were inspired by God. Man wrote them down. Okay, let's go back to history. Because when you go inside, in and out of these spiritual concepts, you have to be willing to put a historical context onto these things. You can't just deal with the dogma only. If you really want to be learned in what you believe in, and if you really want to do that research, and you really want to gain a deeper understanding of the spiritual dogma that you believe in, you have to be willing to go into the history of it all. So we know that Abraham, prior to being um, a so-called Christian, was not a Christian. What was he studying? What was the text out before the Bible came out? Because remember, when Abraham was going through his journey throughout the lands, when he discovered the God of Israel, before he was called into Israel, before his name got changed from Abraham to Abram, or which was the other way around. I think it was Abram, and it got changed to Abraham. So, and before he became Israel, okay, there's a history behind that. Okay. And if you're willing to study that history, I think it will enrich your knowledge and enrich your spirituality. But if you want to stick to what you know, more power to you. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to tell you that your faith is wrong or that your belief system is garbage. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to expose those who have ears to listen. Okay, for those who have had questions and concerns and they want to understand a little bit more than what their pastor or church is teaching. So before you had um, Christianity and the Bible, what came first? Well, historically, the Torah is the oldest book. And what is the Torah? It is the books of Moses, as it is referred to. The five books of Moses, um, which was, let me look that up. Five books. I think it was called Five Books of the. I'm gonna have to look this up. Got a little delay on my computer here. Five books of Torah. I want to say it's called the Talmud or the Pentateuch. I'm sorry, the Pentateuch. Okay, what are those five books? And if you look at them, they're going to be in Hebrew, not necessarily in English, but I think it's going to show me in both languages, and I'm going to have a hard time saying them in the Hebrew language because I have not yet studied Hebrew. That's another chapter of my life I hope I'm able to get to. But I'm here looking online. It shows Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Okay, those are the five books of Moses. Okay, and I'm again, I'm going to show you what I've researched and where I get this information from. So those were the five books of Moses. Those were the original Old Testament before it was expanded upon, and different rules and laws were added and stories were added. But if you talk to a Jewish person and they tell you about these books, they'll tell you this is where it ends and begins. This is our books, and then we have, we have additional books that they believe in to help them learn how to eat, live, how they deal with marriage customs, some extension to the laws and interpretations of the laws, which I believe is what the Torah really um, surmounts to. And the Tanakh, that's what I was looking for. So this talks about the body of scripture known to non-Jews as the Old Testament and to the Jews as the Tanakh or written Torah, because I believe the Tanakh was the verbal customs and the Torah became the written customs. And then you have the interpretation of those laws, etc., and so on. I'll put up the research for that because I'm trying to be general and broad since this is our first spiritual show, and we'll expand upon spirituality as we go along. But that is one of the first spiritual writings that were once an oral tradition. Does that sound familiar? Oral tradition? Think about that for a second. Where does oral tradition usually stem from as far as a people's and how they practice? That's a good question to ask yourself. So anyway, those of the Jewish faith who were not calling themselves Jews, as a matter of fact, it's very interesting when you start researching who these people refer to themselves as and what history has changed those names to, and the more common tongue and names that come about later on. But these people did not refer to themselves as that. Okay. All right, so now we're at some of the original writings, the three Abrahamic traditions where they stem from. And so Christianity was next, right? Christianity, based upon the life of Jesus, stimulated another movement, okay? Because the teachings of Jesus was a movement. You have to look at it in that aspect. It's a movement. What happened there? Okay? Why did people move away from the teachings of Jesus, or excuse me, the teachings of the original? Give me 1 second, y'all. Hey, you with the background noise. You with the background noise. Cassius. Seriously? Of course. I apologize. Parenting is always ongoing. So, we're up to my studies and research, taking a comparative religion class, and the realization that these books that I thought were independent of each other are intertwined and they have a history. And the history usually comes from people separating, okay? You got leaders, and the leaders are going in a different direction, and you got politics. Politics is something that's always existed, whether we call it politics or nothing. But politics no more describes than, the law of the land and it relating to people, and people want that law of the land for personal or power gain, right? That's how I define politics. And so, um, from the original five books of Moses that expanded because there used to be an argument over what dogma should be included in these sacred texts. Oh, look, we found this information. We found that information. Oh, well, where should this fit in? Well, I don't like what that story says because it kind of makes us look bad, and it doesn't speak to the direction that we're going into. So we're going to omit that. We're going to act like that doesn't exist and we're going to move on because if we go with this particular text is going to make people question, well, wait a minute, if you're saying this and this is how we're supposed to behave, then how are we going to explain this item? Okay, that's throughout history. And so the Christians, as they were not called at the time, they were the followers of Yeshua. um, but their original text was the Torah, or the written concept that we learned about just now. Um, the written or the oral knowledge of it was um, the Tanakh, okay? And when the Tanakh became written, it became the Torah, okay? And so these were the original sacred writings. And if you don't know this, basically at the time, the common layman did not read. A lot of them were illiterate because there was absolutely no reason to read. And so when they trusted in their spiritual leaders who were the learned, they were the ones that went to the then what would be considered universities, or they went to the elders and they learned the secret sacred writings, and it was based upon a calling. If the family felt that this child was spiritually touched and they needed to learn, or if they came from an important family and that whole family was a family of priests. You can learn that in the Bible if you don't believe me. The priesthood was passed through from Moses and his children until it was eventually passed through to another set of children if God was displeased with one set of children and say, hey, you're not doing what I told you to do, you're disobedient, give it to your brother Aaron, or give it to your cousin, and you lost the priesthood and it goes on to someone else. That's if you guys are really reading. I know a lot of people who believe in certain spiritual dogma don't really get an opportunity to read the text, and so they go on what their pastor says and what their pastor teaches. But if you take the time and you really want to learn this information, you read it for yourself, you begin to find some themes throughout that are very interesting and makes you begin to question. And so my stream stopped here for a second. Let's see if it picks back up. I don't know why it stopped. Okay, so my stream picked back up there. Sorry about that. That's why I look back and forth here because sometimes it stops. So anyway, if you really begin to evaluate and study, I mean really study what you believe in, you'll find that the origin stories are very interesting. For some of us, it will strengthen our faith. For others, it will make us challenge what we believe in. Okay, and so we're really having some technical difficulties here. My streaming is starting and stopping. Maybe I'll stop flipping back and forth because maybe that's what's causing it to have a problem. So let me get out of that, and well, I need to look at it though, because if I don't know it's not streaming. Okay, sorry. I digress. All right, so this is all based upon my research. This is based upon me taking the time to research and understand what I believe in. These are questions that I had in myself because the Mormon Church really opened my eyes. You know, they do a lot of good in the world. I can't take that away from that church. But underneath that underbelly of it, I have to begin to look at the reasons and rationale why they believe what they believe. What has been their evolution, and what changes have they made over time? All right. And so we're at Christianity. We are at the creation of Christianity, which was not called Christianity during the time that Jesus the Christ lived and is alleged to walk this earth. And the time of Jesus, if you look at the story of Jesus and really evaluate and pick apart that story and unpackage it, you'll realize that Jesus was actually making Hashua, right? Hashua was making a challenge to the church. The famous scene that I like to bring up was when he had gone through his teachings and learning, and he was supposed to go to the main church. And at the main church was the big temple. This was the temple of all temples. This is where everybody went for, the holy celebration. Um, each year, the Passover, and all of those who could go would go, and they would do their rounds there. But what he noticed when he got there was that there was a lot of merchant uh, uh, sales going on there, and he noticed that um, his brethren who were supposed to be holy had become merchants. Okay. Now, if you know anything about the rules of some of the early writings, there were certain things that priests could and could not do according to the law. So you have to first learn the law of those times and what was written of those times to understand why that upset him so much. Because they had certain rules behind what they could and they could not sell. And so Jesus observed, and I call him Jesus for all intents and purposes so we can understand who we're talking about. Um, Jesus observed the sale of what would you call it? The sale of salvation, so to speak. Well, you have to pay this certain amount of tax in order for you to get into heaven, because if you don't pay the church, it's just due, i.e., tithing, right? Where have you heard that before? If you don't uh, give the church their just due, you're not going to be able to inherit the kingdom of God. There's always been this concept of the kingdom of God that we all wanted to live in, which they did not call God. God, then they called him Yahweh. Okay, it was Yahweh, which basically meant, loosely translated, I am who I am, or the name that shall not be spoken, I think I've heard before, or the name that is unknown, so to speak, because that's what believers have been trying to find out. Who is this creator? Where did he come from? Uh, why are we here? What does the creator want us to do? What is our purpose? And those things have evolved over time as different oral traditions and written traditions have changed. Okay. So we're at the point in which the Jesus has walked the earth and found wrongdoing in the church. Remember, he turned over the tables in the synagogue, and he was really upset. And the priesthood was like, "Who is this person? How dare he criticize what we've been doing for years? This is we set this up. We got this, political figure as far as it would have been." I believe at his time it was the Romans who were in power. And so they had enacted certain laws that were affecting the believers. And so, of course, when the Romans came, they had their own set of gods. They were still polytheists. They believed in the god of good fortune, or the god of fertility, the goddess of fertility. They had gods and goddesses, women and men god. The theme of God changing to a man is something that's happened over time too. But the ancient Greeks and the Rome, who then became the Romans, they kind of believed in the gods of the ancients. Okay, and I have to go into that history another show, but we're trying to be loose with it so you can understand how I've arrived through research and study and prayer and meditation. Um, so when Jesus came along, and the Romans were in power, they were held to the standards of Caesar, and so a lot of the belief systems that they had to be modified. A lot of the celebrations that they had to be modified, and they had to do these things around the time that the Romans would allow it, because they were the ruling class at that time. And so when you begin to understand that history, you begin to understand a little bit more how Christians have been accused of celebrating pagan holidays. Because if you know anything about pagan holidays, which is AKA African spiritual concepts, the pagan holidays had certain celebrations for certain deities, okay, small gods, little g, as an expression of the creator, the most high, the big God, the big G, right? Which the word God is not even what the creator was called initially, but that's what we refer to as God now. Again, historical context. So now Christian church came along. They didn't have a dogma. They were still relying on the writings of the Torah. Okay. And that's what their main spirituality was. In addition to that, they had to adhere to the gods of the Roman um, Empire. The Romans had not created a church yet. They were still studying under polytheism. They had their gods and goddesses that they believed in. They prayed to gods like Zeus and Aphrodite and things like that. And so if you really get deep into the research, you'll figure out how some of these gods also have a theme within um, the current Christian theme and some of the older Jewish themes. Some of these things have been recycled if you're willing to look. So um, after the death of Jesus and his judgment by the Roman officials, and he was killed on a cross, that's when that dogma began. Because you have to remember, if the Jewish dogma, which said that the Messiah was still to come, and the Jewish people who weren't referring to themselves as Jewish then, but the Jewish people then, the descendants of Abraham, what they were teaching is that they were still waiting on a Messiah. The Messiah had not come. And so when Jesus came and people were referring to him as the Messiah, which if you read, Jesus never referred to himself as a Messiah, never once stated that he was Messiah. But the people who followed him believed him to be through the lineage of John the Baptist, because he was part of that family lineage. And when he came along, received his baptism, began to practice the new church. Because remember, baptism was not part of the old Jewish church. Baptism was a part of the new traditions that were being created under the following of Yeshua, Jesus, okay, which his name was not Jesus the Christ. People would then call themselves, my name of this family, okay, I'm Jesus of the family of Joseph, or I'm Jesus from Nazareth or Bethlehem, things like that. They didn't call themselves. A Christ has a specific meaning, and I challenge you to look that up. Look up the word Christ, look up the etymology of the word Christ, and look up how it affected or became a commonly used term after the death of Christ. So when he was living, he was not called Jesus the Christ. That was not his name. Okay. You have to understand the evolution of that name and where it came from. All right. So now Jesus is crucified, which I don't know if you all know this fun fact. Crucifixion did not start with Jesus. Some people may know this, some people don't. Please understand, family, that everybody is not at the same place. So some people might say, duh, who didn't know that? That's not where everybody is. And that's the reason why I do these shows, because everyone is not at the same place. And knowledge is power. And so if we don't begin to expose people to this knowledge, and make their mind think and make them begin to do a little bit of research, then we'll continue to believe some of the things that we believe in a certain way. Okay. I'm just trying to expand knowledge. So basically, That's interesting. My phone just decided to come up out of nowhere, and my Bixby came up, and I didn't notify my Bixby to do that. I'm a conspiracy theorist at heart, which is why I study, which is why I want to know. But that's interesting. Anywho, so just reset this. And I see things happening. I just do a nice little reset. Power off. We'll power back on here in a second. Okay. So basically, now we're at the point where Jesus became the Christ, and we now know that Jesus was not always called Jesus the Christ. That was not his name. And we now know that there is a certain connotation to the word Christ if you choose to do the etymology. I'll try to put it here on a link so that you all can view it for your studying pleasure. And now we're going to scoot along to this new doctrine of Christianity. There was a prophecy that came about that Jesus was to fulfill. That was the point. Jesus was supposed to fulfill a particular belief system that a Messiah was to come and relieve them of this pain and suffering under the Roman ruling. The Romans were pretty brutal. It was all or none. Do what I say, and you live under our law. And if you don't, then there's going to be a problem. Well, they noticed a lot of resistance in the people under this new doctrine under Jesus who had been killed. And what they began to realize is that they had made Jesus a martyr, unbeknownst to them. They didn't anticipate the movement that would come from his murder, okay, from his judgment and killing. And the Jewish church wanted him gone. And I'm referring to it as these names so that we can understand. The Jewish church wanted him gone, but the people made it happen that were once his followers. Some of them became afraid because Romans were the iron fist of that time. And so if you were thought to be a follower of Jesus, you were also executed and or persecuted, tortured, things like that for information, because they were trying to find this little group of people that, which was a small group at the time, that were trying to start this movement. Because what the Romans realized was, if we allow these people to raise up and gain power, sound familiar? If we allow these people to raise up and gain a little bit of power, then the people who there's all, if you look at government structure, there's always more citizens than there are government officials, right? The government officials are in the minority and the citizens are in the majority. So if we don't find a way to control these people, which it was a small uprising based upon the death of Jesus, people went into hiding. It was just a war. Okay, it was a war between the new Christian sect, as they would later become referred to, and the Jewish people who basically manipulated and ordered his death. They may have not been the ones who did it. The Romans killed Jesus, but they were the ones that were the catalyst to make it happen, because they began to posture. Remember, a lot of the Jewish officials at that time uh, were in the pockets of the Roman emperors, very similar to the way you see politics today. You know, they were manipulating and backdoor dealing with the Romans. And so, to keep their little bit of power that they had to continue, because they believed in the core that they did have to practice their belief system. And so, they did what they felt they had to do in order to keep that power. Okay. And so that is pretty much the Christians, right? So now let's move along. Maybe several hundred, several thousand years later, I have to look at the timeline. But when you move along the timeline, and the Christians are having all these uh, wars with the Romans, and then finally you have this thing called the Roman Catholic Church. Where the heck did that come from? And how did the Romans become Catholic? If they were monotheists, how did they eventually adopt Christianity? How did they become the Catholics and redesign the Christianity belief, right? Because we learned throughout the story of the Christians that you had people like Moses who traveled to Ethiopia to learn. That's a key. Just gave you a gem. Moses traveled to Ethiopia to learn. What was he learning? That's a question you should be asking yourself. It was a rite of passage to either go to the ancient Egyptian empire or go to the Ethiopian spiritual leaders and learn. That is key. And you all have to do the research for yourself as to why that is. Why did these great leaders in Christian history have to learn under these people? Aren't they different people? Wait a minute, what are we talking about? Where is this all housed? Um, the setting is Africa. That's very important for you to understand. I don't care what anyone is calling it now. I don't care if it's called the Middle East. I don't care if it's called South Africa, East Africa, West Africa. One point that you need to understand that the stage, the scene of the crime, all of this is occurring in Africa. There was no such thing as necessarily Europe at this time. There was no such thing as Asia at this time. You had people talking about the East and the West. That's kind of how they refer to these land masses. These land masses have had different names over time. Again, family, if you do not begin to do the historical context behind in which you believe, the things that you believe, you are losing part of the important information. You are losing the struggle of the people. You are losing the politics of the time, and you are losing the theme. Why, what, when, how, and where. Okay? Now we're moving along. The Christians are fighting basically a holy war with the Jewish. They're fighting a war with the Roman Catholics, who've now established this church under the guise of Christianity. There's a rich history there. In brief, there was a council that was drawn up. You'll hear people talking about the Council of Nicaea. It's important that you understand that council under the ruler Constantine, who was a later ruler from the original Caesar, who gained power, who wanted notoriety, who wanted world domination. Sounds familiar? World domination. That's the key. Anything that we fought over has been based upon a ruler trying to gain control over the people and world domination. Okay? I'm doing a very brief timeline. It's a lot of information. It's taken me years to study this, and there's people that's done way more studying than me. I'm just scratching the surface. It gets deep. Okay, so that's the brief. So you have to research the Council of Nicaea to understand how we even receive the Bible. Okay, this is important to know. This is how we received our Bible, the canon, as we now know it. That council basically brought all those ancient writings together. Some of the writings you know about now, some of you don't. When you hear people say things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and it's lost information, it wasn't lost. It was suppressed. It was suppressed for a reason. Again, when you have a ruling class, they get to decide who receives what. Okay, as far as resources. There was a time in Catholic history, which were the Christians back in the day, those were the original Christians, know that it was a time where certain writings were allowed into the Bible and certain weren't. And there was a specific reason. How does this jive with what we're trying to do now? Will this help us gain control of these people and centralize this under one belief system, which everyone is going to be required to believe now? If you're going to be a part of this province, this district, this government, you must believe in this doctrine. Um, who benefited from the dogma? That's something that you have to ask yourself, and what was its overall theme and purpose. Okay, so in this case, the purpose was for Roman domination. Okay, so they established the Roman Catholic Church. That's where it's all coming from under the guise of the Council of Nicaea. Interestingly enough, if you look at the players in the Council of Nicaea, you'll figure out that a lot of the African spiritual leaders had a lot to do with that council, because they wanted to preserve as much of the original spiritual dogma that was of the ancient people as they could, which were all principles of one concept that I'll get into as I travel along the timeline. Okay, so there's been many holy wars. The Jesuits were created. The what is the other name that I'm losing? I believe the Jesuits were the army of the Catholics, then maybe referred to as the Vatican, but there was a spiritual army. Let me see if I can look this up real quick. Spiritual Army, Roman Catholic Church. Let's see if I can figure out who they were. I forget their names. But I believe it was the Jesuits. The Jesuits were responsible for basically waging holy war on all of those outside groups that refused to conform, refused to um, convert to Catholicism as the new spiritual force. But if you lived within their province and territories, you were expected. They had conditions in which they would go around and just arbitrarily, census people and say, "What do you believe in? What's the current dogma?" Kind of like a little quiz. And if you didn't answer those questions right, you will surely die. And this is not a joke. And you would die for generations. This is when they were killing ancestries off, whole families off. It was very cruel. But I'm pretty sure it was the Jesuits. But I think I'm missing another name in my memory base here. It describes the Jesuits as a member of the Society of Jesus, a Roman Catholic order of priests founded by Saint Ignatius Loyola, Saint Francis Xavier, and others in 1534 to do missionary work. The order was zealous in opposing the Reformation. Despite periodic persecution, it has retained an important influence. So these people still exist. If you want to look it up, you can look up some of their writings, and you'll find a very interesting symbol when you look that up. I want to see if any of you can pick that out. But it was another name. Oh, gosh, it wasn't the Jesuits. Who was it? Ancient Christian Army. Let me see if I can figure this out because I know it's another name that's on the tip of my tongue and I can't think of it right now. It'll come to me later. But the Jesuits still exist and they waged holy war. Okay. And if you do not believe in their dogma, if you did not answer that question correctly, you were persecuted. Either you had to attend inquiry, and that inquiry would require some questions about your beliefs and about um, your alliances. Keyword alliances. Who are you aligned with? This is our new direction. Are you with it or aren't you? Okay, and so that's something important to know about the history of the church. And I know I'm opening up minds here as you listen to this. Some people know some of this information already, and some people will not. But it is important that um, to me, if you're going to believe in a particular dogma, that you know the history of what you believe. And I'm taking you through my own personal spiritual journey as to what made me question things and what made me begin to look at some of this information because some of it just wasn't making sense to me. It just didn't make sense to me. And I wanted to also know for my own self culturally, why are Black people persecuted so bad? And some of those answers are within the holy wars that have been fought. Okay, there's an underlying um, racist tone because remember, the ancient Greeks were very arrogant people, and they thought that um, they were above others. Which, if you look at their genealogy, you'll find some very interesting history about them. And as they became the Romans, you'll notice some other interesting um, uh, genealogy, anthropology about where they come from, who they were, and how they've changed over time, and how they changed themselves over time, how some of their belief systems made them into who they are. Even today, when you look at Romania and some of those places where the Vatican and their small army, the Vatican has its own army. Okay, they have their own military, they have their own police. Okay, and so you have to begin to ask yourself why? Why would a holy church need these kind of things? These are the questions that I had. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. Okay, so now I know Christianity has such a deep history and is such a large part of our history, but another large part of our history is the human race, is Islam. So you ask any person who's very learned in Islam, and they will tell you that Islam came to correct Christianity. Okay, it came to fix the rights of the wrongs. When Prophet Muhammad came along, he had a particular purpose. He was visited by a spiritual being, according to the dogma, and he had a task that he was given. Okay, read, learn, become learned, no longer live in ignorance, because it is said that he was not a literate man, which illiteracy has different levels to it, right? Some people say he couldn't read. Okay, well, maybe you're right about that. And how did he write, the Quran? How did he write that? if he was an illiterate man? Well, you have to dig into the history of that and understand what the concepts are under that. Okay. Again, this is a progression. Okay. If you ever get a chance to read the Quran, which I have that too on my bookshelf. I have a Bible on my bookshelf. I have the Book of Mormon on my bookshelf. I've read copies of the Torah, but I have yet to gain the original copy. And I guess the reason being is because I feel like honestly, some of the writings are similar, but I've learned later as I try to learn different languages that the Torah language is not anything like the Old Testament that we read now. So it's important to know some of that language and some of the original writings and how that has transformed over time. So, um, you know, if my lifespan allows it, I will dig into that eventually in my spare time. But there's so much information out here. Okay, so um, now we're into Islam. Now we know that Islam was meant to be a correction to the past books. The claim is that there were a lot of misteachings. The Bible was created by basically the heathen, and the heathen took over. Islam knows this history of the Council of Nicaea, and there was an attempt. Uh oh, I've stopped again. I'm resuming. Okay, the stream is continuing. I've got like a weak signal today, even though my signal's been pretty good. Hopefully, there's not too much. Um, hopefully, there's not too much lag. Okay, so we're now at Islam. Okay. And please understand at the same time, and I just don't want to leave out all of these different religions. There's a lot of religions in the world. I mean, you have Hinduism that came along based upon the concepts and principles of the Christian faith. You have Buddhism that's come along. Some of these are even older than the Christian faith. I've studied some of them, but not as in much detail because of my background, because of my faith. But I have studied Hinduism and the caste system and Buddhism. Um, those are very interesting faiths that I actually want to take time out to talk about separately. Okay, I think that they're similar. Some of the themes and concepts are similar as far as a divine being, an immaculate conception, and so on and so forth. And if you notice, a lot of these themes are based upon a divine being and an immaculate conception. Most of these stories have that theme in it. And you have to wonder if all of these stories have that theme in it, where did they come from? Okay. So now we're at the Islam, okay, and Islam dogma, and studying the Quran. And when you study the Quran, you'll notice that some of the characters are the same. And you have to ask yourself, well, if this is a whole different faith and they say we don't believe in Jesus, so to speak, how is it the same? Well, you need to revamp your understanding of the religion. It's not that those who believe in the Islamic faith don't believe in Jesus. They don't believe in Jesus in the same concept in which Christians do, equivalent to the Jewish faith. Those who practice Judaism do not believe in the plight of Jesus as part of their story. They believe it as a perversion of their story. And so you have to understand how these characters play a role in all of these stories, all of these dogma, but you'll come to find that they're intertwined. You can't have one without the other. Usually there's a basis for them all. Although Islam is one of the most widely accepted and practiced faiths, it is the newest of them all. It is the newest of them all. Okay. And that's something that's important to know that many people may not know. But if you're going to really be a warrior of God, in my mind, a warrior of the Most High, a warrior of the Creator, a warrior of Yahweh, I don't think it's in your best interest not to ask these questions of your Creator, not to ask for guidance from your Creator of these principles. It's very important to get into the historical context, the politics surrounding the people at the time, because that is very important. Okay, politics have been living in our lives for a long time, although we may have not called it politics at the time. That's basically the concept of what it was. And uh, just trying to get gain an understanding on how we've arrived at this point. Why are we Christians? Why are we Muslims? Why are we Jewish? You know, and all the different variations that come in between. Okay, they're all based upon. Okay, my stream is going in and out. Now it is resumed again. Okay, it's continuing. All right, I think it's continuing here. And so, the moral of the story in my eyes and in my studies and in my path has been that um, human beings have made these separations. And human beings have made these separations based upon um, information, based upon ideology changes, based upon fighting, infighting, whether family fighting, governmental fighting, cultural fighting, cultural wars. All these things bring about the changes that we see today. And so now, as we trek through Islam, which also included Hinduism and Buddhism, okay, those faiths are also real and a part. And if anything, about the Buddhists and the Islamics, they fought. The Hindus and the Christians have fought. All of these different spiritual belief systems of people have fought each other for dominance, for control of the minds, and as they perceive the spirit of the people in the name of God. Okay. And so, as we move along, one thing I had to begin to understand and realize was okay, if all of these had an origin story, like X-Men origin stories, right? All of these had an origin story. Where did they all get their information from? Remember, I talked about the Greeks and the Romans having polytheistic views and multiple gods, and how we moved to a monotheistic view based upon the Abrahamic religions, and where all this monotheism was birthed out of one God, concept. Well, you have to go back, go back, go back. And where you'll find yourself is in a few places. You'll find yourself in Ethiopia. You'll find yourself in ancient Egypt, referred to as Kemet. And you'll find yourself in Sumeria, are the places that were considered of holy origins. Okay, those are some of the three places that you can research: ancient Kemet, ancient Ethiopia, and ancient Sumeria. Okay, these are key places as far as ancient places in Africa. Where did I tell you the scene of the crime was? Africa. I would encourage you to look at this book here. This is a concept. There's different people who've rewritten this, but I found this to be the most comprehensive for me and my purposes. The Book of the Coming Forth by Day, commonly referred to as the Book of the Dead for a reason. People do not. Uh-oh, my stream resumed. Let me do that again. So this is the Book of the Coming Forth by Day. This individual rewrote it. This is the individual, if I'm not mistaken, who came up with the concept of um, Kwanzaa, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Uh-oh, keeps going on and out, keeps going in and out. Let me do it one more time. All right. The Book of the Coming Forth by Day, commonly referred to as the Book of the Dead. The individual that wrote this particular book, which is Mulana Karinga, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was the creator of Kwanzaa. And basically, this book is just kind of going through the details of the book of coming forth by day and by night, as it's referred to. And you'll find some very interesting things when you talk about the 42 confessions. Okay. Hone in on the 42 confessions. Okay. And I would like to take the time now to read some of those confessions, and maybe you'll see a theme here. Maybe you'll see a concept here that is interesting. Let me get to that part. Sorry. I should have had it. bookmarked here. And it's called the Declaration of Innocence. Okay. A lot of this was originally in hieroglyphic text. It was translated. The translations are ongoing. People keep visiting and revisiting, and they want to make sure that they're translating this properly. But you can see it in the hieroglyphic text, and you can see the translation on the other side of the page, which I'm very intrigued by hieroglyphic text because I love the symbolism and how um, it represents. So I'm going to take the time to go through these as the last part of this show. I just want to give you all a history and a concept. This one goes up to 36. I thought it was 42 confessions, but make sure I'm getting Declaration of Independence. Okay, this is part A. So I guess this is some of the translations, and this is the second translation. We as people of the earth, especially people of color, because I have a very firm belief that when Black people, as we refer to ourselves now, begin to find the truth of the matter again, the earth will return to a concept called ma'at, and I will explain ma'at to you after I read these 42 confessions. So the 42 confessions called the Declaration of Innocence. First one says, O wide strider who comes forth from Heliopolis, I have not done evil. Number 2, O embracer of fire who comes forth from Caria, I have not robbed. I could be pronouncing some of these words wrong. I'm still learning. Number 3, O long nose who comes forth from Hermopolis, I have not stolen. Again, these are ancient African texts that were written about confessions of the type of human being they were they were living on this earth and their confessions to the creator of what kind of human being they had been. And this was upon the judgment. O consumer of shadows, who comes forth from the cave, I have not killed people. O fierce of face, who comes forth from Rostau, I have not destroyed food supplies. O double lion who comes forth from heaven, I have not done fraudulent things. O flint eye who comes forth from Letopolis, I have not stolen sacred property. Number 8. O fiery one who comes forth backwards, I have not told lies. Number 9. O breaker of bones who comes forth from Heracleopolis, I have not taken away food. Uh-oh. Gotta plug up my battery before we lose each other. I thought I plugged this up, but I guess I did not. Let me plug my battery up before I lose y'all. There, power. Okay. We were on number 8, O fiery one who comes forth backwards. I have not told lies. Uh-oh. Says my stream is low output. Let's see if we can get this back right. It's probably because I waited too long to plug up my battery. Let me hear how I sound, because if I sound smooth, I can keep going. Okay, I sound smooth. So we'll keep going. Number 9, O breaker of bones who comes forth from Heracleopolis, I have not taken away food. O flourishing of flame who comes forth from Memphis, I have not been sullen. O cave dweller who comes forth from the west, I have not been unchaste. O backward face who comes forth from the pit, I have not winked. In brackets it says, at injustice. Number 13, O wanderer who comes forth from Bubastis, I have not been false or disassembled. 14, O flame-footed who comes forth from dusk, I have not violated. In parentheses, it says the law in brackets. 15. O consumer of blood who comes forth from the place of slaughter, I have not dealt deceitfully. Number 16. O consumer of entrails who comes forth from the tribunal of 30, I have not stolen cultivated land. Number 17. O Lord of Ma'at who comes from Ma'ati, I have not eavesdropped. Number 18. A wanderer who comes forth from Barbustus, I have not, in brackets, trespassed. That may mean that the translation may be in dispute when it's in parentheses like that or brackets. Number 19, O pale one who comes forth on, I have not contended except concerning my own goods. You guys have to really think about what these are saying. These were written in stone and translated. And you have dogmas that say we were the originators of all this. Think about that. 20. O truly evil one who comes from Anjet, I have not lain with another's wife. 21. O Wamiti snake who comes from the slaughterhouse. Listen to that. O Wamiti snake. Who's the deceiver? I have not lain with another's wife. That's number 20. I'm sorry, number 21. A Wamiti snake who comes from the slaughterhouse. I have not committed adultery. I mixed two. I apologize. The laying with another's wife was 20. 22. O you who see, who you bring, who comes forth from men's temple. I have not been unchaste. 23. O chief of the elders, in brackets, nobles, who comes forth from Japhet. I have not terrorized anyone. Again, I apologize if these words are not written right, but you can look up the confessions yourself and see the spellings. Number 24, a wrecker who comes forth from Zois, Xois. I have not transgressed, in brackets, the law. 25, a disturber who comes from the wort, WerYt. I have not been hot tempered. Number 26, O child who comes forth from the name of On, I have not been deaf to the words of truth. Number 27, O dark one who comes forth from darkness, I have not quarreled. Number 28, O peace bringer who comes forth from Sais, I have not been aggressive. Number 29, O foreteller of things to come who comes forth from Wincy, I have not caused strife. Number 30, O one of many faces who comes forth from Jetfet or the Jetfet. It's spelled Ndjefet. I'm not sure if the N gets pronounced in the Jetfet, the Jetfet. I have not been impatient. Number 31, O accuser who comes forth from Wedjetmet. I have not eavesdropped. Eavesdropping seems to be a big thing. 32. O horned one who comes from Siut, Siut. I have not been talkative. O 33. O Nefertim who comes forth from Memphis. I have not done no evil. 34. O timeless one who comes forth from Dejadu or Jedu, Djedu. I have not cursed or opposed the king. 35. Or one who acts as he wills, who comes forth from Tejebu or Jebu without the T. I have not waded in water. 36. Or one who treads on water, who comes forth from none. I have not raised my voice. 37. O commander of people who comes forth from his sais, Sais. I have not cursed or opposed God. 38. O provider of Kas who comes forth from his cavern. I have not exalted myself. 39. O provider of God who comes forth from his cavern. I have not stolen, in parentheses or brackets, destroyed divine offerings. Number 40. O one of raised head who comes forth from the cavern. I have not stolen the offerings of the departed ones. 41. O one who brings and gives, who comes forth from Ma'ati. I have not taken bread from a child or blasphemed the God of my city. 42. O white tooth who comes forth from Lakeland. I have not killed sacred cattle. Kind of lets you know where the Hindus get worshiping the cow from, right? Remember, we are human beings. We are all connected. And so this book just gives some notes on the findings, what the takeaways are from these readings and concepts, and just their opinion on it. Okay, because sometimes you can read something you're like, what was that supposed to mean? Well, the author of this particular book and interpretations tried to give you some understanding um, on this. But there are many people in our history, as far as African American history and African history, who have tried to expose these certain truths, and these truths have been suppressed. People have been persecuted, um, hunted down, and killed for exposing these truths. And so my question always is if someone's telling a lie, or what they're saying is just not comprehensive or has no bearing, why kill them? Why persecute them? Why make them feel as if what they're saying is untrue? For example, if I say my sister stole from me, right? And my sister knows that I didn't steal from her, I guess my sister could take on the attitude, no, she has to be stopped. Don't spread lies, right? And I'm going to expose her lies. Or she could say, I can ignore you because I know the truth. And there's no evidence you can bring forward that will prove that these lies are true, right? But we also know we have a concept or a thing called deceit. And in deceit, people will drum up false evidence about you, and they will demonize you and make you out to be a liar even when you're telling the truth. So we have a spiritual war that is going on, and a lot of people in their faith believe that the spiritual war is for our souls. I think there could be some truth to that. I think it gets deeper than that. I think it is all about control. I think the more free a belief system is, the more fluid a belief system is, the less the powers that be like it, because it doesn't create an environment of hierarchy. It doesn't create an environment where people can control you, where people can tell you what to believe and what not to believe, which is the current dogmas that we have. What's the fear in most of the dogmas? If you don't obey God, you are going to hell. If you don't do these things, you are going to hell. If you want to inherit anything beyond this earth, you have to do this, this, that, and the other, and then you will get it. The problem I have with that, and where I have no faith in this information, is that no one has ever come back to my knowledge um, or observation. I have no witness testimony to say that these things have happened. All we can do is read about what people did in history. And the reason why I've gravitated towards now African spirituality, because I believe that we are deeply spiritual people and we have to have that connection. It's just a phenomenon that have been studied by sociologists, psychologists, um, alike, who tried to understand, why do human beings create these things? Why do we believe so justly in creating dogmas that identify us as human beings, that tell us that we're supposed to have these certain beliefs, or else why do human beings create these situations? I think that it is an innate part of us that we cannot escape to find the meaning of things. I think that the reason why we can't escape spirituality is because it is a segment of us that we don't understand. So, for example, remember our last session, I played that video of KRS-One where he was talking about, saying a word that he put up. And the word um, was to be said with your mouth closed and you say it. None of us can deny that inside of our heads we say that word. And so his question, which was very profound and it'll probably have you thinking till you're dizzy in the head, and that is, where did that voice come from? Some people say, oh, that's just your inside voice. Okay, but what is the inside voice? Where did it come from? Why can't you hear it and nobody else can hear it? Why is this voice so pronounced? Why do we have memories in our head that are vivid that we can see as if we're looking out into something? If we close our eyes, we can still see. If we close our ears, we can still hear that inside voice. If we close our mouth, we can talk to ourselves without using this physical mouth. Because I choose to look beyond the material world, which is what most people do, because I am not afraid to look deeply, because I feel there's something inside of me that is meant to do these things and then to bring them out. I'm unafraid. I'm not afraid to speak in this way. I'm not afraid to talk to people. I've been moved to create a platform, this one, to begin to ask questions. Soon you will see me out in the community asking these same questions, gauging and getting responses from people. And so you're going to see how dogma affects people in real time. When I say things like, I don't believe Jesus is real, and you all will watch what that incites in people. And you have to begin to ask yourself, why? Why are people so upset about this? Why have we become upset about this when none of us have any proof, whether in favor of a Jesus or whether against the favor of there being a Jesus that ever walked this earth? No anthropological, no anthropological evidence pointing to a Jesus the Christ walking this earth. Biblical historians have conceded this. If you do the research, if you are willing to look at the scholars who have taken their life's work looking for this. And so, with my discovery of this information, I think it's important to let people know that this is being said. Let people know that this is a common knowledge, that the biblical characters that we so love, that we so follow, the mythos behind them is not a reality. These people never lived. In reality, there's no proof that they lived. And so we begin to have to ask ourselves, why were these stories written? You have to research the lineage of these stories and find out who wrote them and why. What was their rationale? What was their motivations? And that's going to require an evolution of our own minds. Now, me being a Black woman in America, I know damn well I can't believe in the Christianity that the Europeans brought, because I know now through historical context why they gave it to us. Do we know that when we got off of those boats enslaved, formerly human beings with dignity, cultures, tribe, and language, why those things were stripped from us? If you believe that our language, culture, and practices were stripped from us because we were heathens and we needed to be corrected, and God gave us slavery so that we could become better people, more power to you. I don't believe that. I don't believe that we have been misdirected because God forsaken us or the Creator forsaken us. I believe that these things happen because human beings crave power, human beings crave domination. I believe that we had a distinct culture. I believe that we spoke in a language that was tonal and more in depth with the nature that we have around us. And last, I told you I was going to give you what the concept of Ma'at was. What is Ma'at? M-A-A-T. What is the principle of Ma'at? Well, I'll read it from this intelligent brother's concept of it, and I'll tell you what I understand it to be and how I try to use it in my life. How I've moved away from Christian, Islamic, and Judaism dogma, and how I began to traverse the spiritual realm that's so much deeper than we can imagine. So, just read an excerpt from the book. The principle of Ma'at. Any discussion of Kemetic spirituality, whether it is theology, anthropology, or ethics, must of necessity include, perhaps even begin with, a discussion of Ma'at. For Ma'at is the fundamental principle of ancient Egyptian life. It is the fundamental principle of the divine, natural, and social order established by Ra, God, at the time of creation. He says, as Henry Frankfurt observed, Ma'at is a divine order established at the time of creation, and it is manifest in nature as the normalcy of phenomena, in society as justice, and in the individual's life. He paraphrases as truth. Siegfried Morens agrees with this, stating that Ma'at is right order in nature and society, as established by the act of creation, and hence means according to context, which is right, which is correct, law, order, justice, and truth. Ma'at as righteousness in the divine, natural, and social sense becomes the unifying principles of existence. And as it states in the sacred text, it is that which God loves and requires, and humans love and request. In fact, it is the essence of God Himself. As Queen Hatshepsut notes, Ra loves Ma'at and lives by it. And as will be argued below, Ma'at is the grounds for ontological unity between God and humans. Given Ma'at's importance to the divine, natural, and social order, it is imperative that it, in small, thus as Morin states, Ma'at is not only right order, but also the object of human activity. Ma'at then expresses its importance in its being a standard of righteousness and a goal of practice. Therefore, Ma'at is the standard by which a person is judged in society in the other world, and it is a self declared goal or achievement in historical and ethical literature. The literature, as will be shown below, is full of decorations of virtues. For example, having done ma'at, that which uh, divinities and humans love, and immorality require. Conscious that each will be judged by both history and heaven, humans and God, ma'at becomes the measurement of thought, emotion, speech, and conduct, and a goal of practice. But in addition, ma'at becomes a reward in itself, for it builds character and community and ensures immorality. Thus, Baker says he has done good on earth, avoiding injuring others, being evil or approving of any evil, and delighted in speaking truth. For he continues, I know well the reward that comes from this on earth, from the time of one's first act to the time one reaches the grave. He goes on to say that truth will be his sure defense on the day when I reach the divine judges. Ma'at's opposite is isfet, untruth, falsehood, disorder. As the Sabbat, the books of wise instruction, teach, Isfet is the abomination of God. It may gain ground for a while, but in the end, it leads to destruction. As Ptahhotep says, Ma'at is great and its value is lasting. Although wickedness may gain wealth, wrongdoing has never brought its wares to a safe port. In the end, it is Ma'at that endures and enables one to say, it is the legacy of my father and mother. Ma'at then is the lasting legacy, thus one should speak Ma'at and do Ma'at. For it causes one to have an enriched life and is basic standard by which one is judged by history in heaven. And so the book, that's part A, it goes on to the philosophical anthropology, um, the divine image of humans, the perfectibility of humans, the teachability of humans, free will of humans, the essential of moral social practice, um, the concept of immorality. It goes on to title and talk about. Oh, that was the end of it. And so there's some notes and quotes and lots of bibliography here on where this concept came from. So what I am in I guess what I'm trying to say to my brothers and sisters is that the concept of biblical reference, of Quranic reference, of Torah reference, is that these concepts all were developed in part of African spirituality, even though it wasn't called Africa then, but for the purposes of words that we can relate to, it was not. Um, it was our origin story as human beings. Because if we're going to say anthropologically that we all come from the mitochondrial DNA of one African woman, then it would suffice to say that these concepts also were developed from those persons and beings until we could find other information. But every time we go look for ourselves, we keep coming back to the same thing, that we are these people, that these human beings are the origin story of all of us, and that they develop concepts based upon their observation of nature, based upon their observation of interactions with each other, and creating a sort of compass in which we should live. And fast forwarding to current date and time, all of those concepts have enveloped within each other and have developed from there. But somewhere along the way, we have gone wrong and we have gotten away from the whole concept of ma'at, which I just explained to you, which is the meaning of it all so far that we can surmise, which is the origin story of us and what our ancestors believed and wanted us to understand about ourselves, nature, and how we should interact with it. If you look at all of these references as far as dogma in the current times, you'll realize if you choose to go further back, right? So if I'm a human being and I want to know, who am I like? Who did I get my ways from? I look at my mother, I look at my father. But does the story stop there? Because maybe you might have a relative to say, oh, you act just like Auntie so and so or Uncle so and so, right? So we have to keep digging through our familial history and ancestry to understand who we are and why we believe what we believe. And that's what I'm challenging everyone to do. Don't just allow people to force feed you information. And when that information takes a wrong turn and it doesn't seem to make sense, it doesn't fit into the puzzle pieces, then that's when you have to begin to do your research and study. If you are completely satisfied with where you are and your dogma suits you and it gets you to where you are, so be it. But society is collapsing and falling apart for a specific reason. I believe that reason is because we're not speaking in the tonal language that we used to speak. We have culturally come away from who we were, especially African Americans, especially African Americans. Our language, our culture, our belief system was stripped from us. For those of you who don't understand the history and think that we had no religion before slavery, as they used to teach in our books here in the Western world, they used to teach us that we had no religion, we had no faith, we were a barbaric people. We now know that not to be true due to the strides and pain and disenfranchisement of our ancestors, such as Sheikh Ante Diop, and such as Dr. Ben Joseph Yochanan, such as Dr. John Heinrich Clark. All of these powerful ancestors, including more, that's not limited to those people risked uh, professional annihilation and ostracization. They all risk this to get the truth across to us. And I think we owe it to them to evaluate the information that they brought forward, to digest it, and to use the information that they're giving to us to let us know as African based people, we have been lied to, we have been corralled into this central dogma that has not helped us get out of the situation that we're in. And therefore, we're going to have to collectively begin to look at this information, pick it apart, give it its just due, and evaluate it in a way that's going to help us grow. Because as far as I can see, we have had this church type of situation going on across all disciplines. And for some reason, we're not able to help lift our people up. We've actually gone in reverse. Our institutions have been picked apart. We're just now learning that the information that we've been receiving all these years have been incorrect. And if you have any interest in making sure that the next generations do not fall for these same tricks, then you'll delve into this information. You'll take it into consideration and maybe research for yourself and find out that what I'm saying is the absolute truth. I would not have been compelled to come on here spending my time on a Sunday when I could be doing other things, introducing my people to this as many others have done before. Hours and hours of research and reading and studying and lecture watching. And even some of us have become lecture builders to be able to get this information across to our people, only to be ostracized, only to be called a quack, a kook. We have to learn our history and understand our battles and understand what devices have been used to keep us separated. Remember, the concept is divide and conquer. A divided people cannot ever accomplish anything. And if we don't begin to understand our history, if we don't begin to understand the concepts that our ancestors meant for us to have, not this dogma that you've been given by the European nation in order to divide and conquer you, we will have lost the battle. And we will continuously see and ask questions like, why do they hate us so much? I just saw that on Twitter the other day. A person says, I just want to know. And you could feel it in her heart because I asked it when I was younger. Why? I just want to know, why do they hate us so much? If you look at this Black Panther movie that came out, if you just read the comments of some of the posts, you'll realize that this is a war. They don't even want a fictitious movie coming out about Black empowerment, about African empowerment and technology and knowledge. You have to think about that. You can't just look at it like, oh, well, they're just crazy or they just, they're misguided. No, it's deeper than that. We have a loss of knowledge and information, and it's up to us to want to study those things. My last little thing I want to say in fun, because we got heavy and serious there, um, and I just don't believe in taking myself too seriously. I believe the information that I'm putting across may not have a benefit now, but it may have a benefit later. And so that's why I do it, because I'm not looking for personal gain. I'm looking to collectively begin to practice those principles of my eye that teaches us collective thinking so that we can empower ourselves. So I got this little action figure. Who is it? Now I got other action figures coming, but this is Eric Killmonger. Now his name was something that bothered me. I'm not gonna lie. He's a bobblehead too. But I bought this one. This is the only single action figure I bought. I bought the smaller action figure set, but this one stuck to me. And let me tell you why. Because he was the antagonist of the story. If we're going to be real and we're going to evaluate the Marvel comic story for what it is, the way that they rewrote it, he was the antagonist in the story. Now, philosophically, if we're going to get into that, if people watch my stream and said, "Ah, she's just like the rest of them," no, because I also put on my Twitter feed that there were two heroes, even though he was an antagonist, and Killmonger was just as much as a hero as the Black Panther to me. Not necessarily how the story is written, but to me, because he expressed a feeling inside of us of revolution. The revolution is that we have been wronged. Our African brothers and sisters have ignored us for too long, and we need to merge again. Now, the way he went about it, my dear brother, in the movie, the way he went about it is the problem and is what we're dealing with now. We have a lot of people in the conscious community I've been watching for a long time. I'm critical of my people, like I said, and you may not agree with me. You may call me names, but that makes me no difference because I'm going to speak truth to power no matter where that power may come from. The reality is that we have been hating so long and upset and angry and fearful for so long, we have created a new dynamic in us. We're lashing out, we're not being strategic, and we are being Killmonger. This is who we've become collectively here and across the diaspora. We have not been thinking strategically. Like I said, life is chess. It's not checkers. The way that you present things, the way that you move about, the way that you attack a monster has to be of strategy. If you just go out and just charge, there'll be more casualties that way. And we've seen it already, haven't we? Haven't we seen that? Haven't we seen our brothers and sisters get slain before they could even begin, or they have a short reign because they have not thought out properly and have allowed emotion to be their guide? Any soldier will tell you that emotion is your worst enemy. We have to learn to attack this demon, this adversary, this antagonist of the story called us, African people. Our own creation. I'll get into that deeper later when I do my lecture on who these Europeans are, where they came from, and how they were created. It's a very deep story. But once we understand the principle of Ma'at, which is the very interesting theme of the chaos theory, as we call it, as we begin to delve into that, it'll make more sense what I'm saying to you. I can't unleash everything on you at one time because this has taken me years of contemplation, of studying, and of thinking. And I'm still not done. There's still a lot more information I don't know, and I can't piece to the story because the story has been fragmented. We have a fragmented story. We're missing a lot of information. And as I bring this to a close, I hope that the information that I've presented here will be helpful. I will add the links of information I've spilled out here so that you can research for yourself and expand upon that, because I'm only going to give you one or two sources to what information I've discovered. There are brothers and sisters that have taken the time to do extensive research on some of these subjects that I implore that you begin to investigate. And I hope this information comes to you in good spirit. It doesn't make you sour. In fact, I hope it makes you rejoice that truth is out here and you're not crazy, and you're not imagining it, and you're not losing your mind. You have to regain your mind and your faculties by delving into the information. Don't let it make you angry. Let it make you feel empowered that you now know the truth and no one can hold that against you any longer. So now you know the principles of Ma'at. Now you know the 42 confessions. And now you know my spiritual journey. Now you know the premise in which I'm coming from, and you don't have to wonder, what is this sister about? I'm so dynamic, though, you can't just figure me out in one gist. I'm multifaceted. Thank you for coming. Thank you for walking with me. Thank you for becoming a part of the community of ETRB. I'm thankful for all my subscribers, and I hope the information that I provide will help you to branch out and help other people. That is my purpose. Because remember, I think at this point it's for every 9 people that complain, 3 people recommend. And so I'm willing to get to those 3 people because that will become a snowball. And that snowball eventually will catch on. And as people go through life and they go through trial and error, they'll come to realize some of the things that people were saying were not as crazy as they seemed maybe 2 years ago. 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Some of these things that have been said, people have been wrote off as crazy as hell. But now, as we've come into our current lives and what's going on in current times, of all of the conflicts that's going on, I think people are beginning to come around to the information and beginning to want to study it. And remember, this information is relevant because a new generation is born all the time. And so we have to be able to recycle this information and make it available to those who need to learn. And if we can get to a point where we learn this information from the beginning and not have to deprogram everybody, that's the uphill battle, is the deprogramming. You talking about people who are hardcore believers and unwilling to read anything else. You have people that say things like the Bible is all I need, the Quran is all I need. Really? Go out and fix that car using that Quran or that Torah. Go fix it. Tell me if it will tell you that. Oh, you want to be a professional? Go use your Bible and your Quran and see if you can use that. So those are unreasonable things to say to people who offer you additional information. Because we know that those dogmas cannot be used for any and everything. We know that human beings have evolved to write other important documents and specifications to help us throughout life. So why not research all of the information surrounding the dogma that you believe in? Again, either it will strengthen your faith or it will make you question the things that you believe. Either way, you will learn. Thank you for walking with me. This has been a fifth edition of EITR. Every fifth edition, I will delve into spirituality and the things that I believe will help us grow as a people. We have to become collective again. With that, I'm out.